Government fails, the world's off its rails, leaders are whacked, democracy is under attack. It's time to get smart, folks, time to get real. Let's cut through the crap, tell us how you feel. Let's cue the talent, let's meet the host. Podcast by George.
Hello, hi, how are you? Welcome on in to another podcast by George. Well, we've kind of got deuces wild this morning, or 20s maybe. This is my second year of doing the podcast. This is the 200th episode of Podcast by George, and I couldn't be happier to do the topic that we're on, which is climate, because I'm all about that. You've heard me talk about how significant that is, and it's because it's a big part of the 2020 world that we live in 2020. In 20 minutes, we can be dead from a Trident submarine class accidental launch. 20 minutes, we're all dead. In 20 years, I think we're all dead if we don't get on the climate catastrophe, if we don't do something. That's the 2020 world that we live in 2020, and the 200th episode of Podcast by George. And we've got a special guest today. We've got Channing Dutton. Channing's with the Citizens Climate Lobby. And to get us started and to give you an idea of where I'm at on this and why I wanted to talk to Channing today, I'm going to read as an open here just a few paragraphs from this article in the Associated Press that some of you may have seen. And it's entitled, "Think 2020's Disasters Are Wild? Experts See Worse in the Future." This is by Seth Borenstein in the AP back on September 9th. He says, a record amount of California is burning, spurred by a nearly 20-year mega drought. To the north, parts of Oregon that don't usually catch fire are in flames. Meanwhile, the Atlantic's 16th and 17th named tropical storms are swirling, a record number for this time of year. A powerful typhoon lashed Japan and the Korean Peninsula that week. And last month, it hit 130 degrees in Death Valley, the hottest the Earth has seen in nearly a century. Now, Phoenix keeps setting triple-digit heat records, if you know anybody living down there, while Colorado, remember this, they went through a weather whiplash, 90-degree heat to snow. Siberia, famous for its icy climate, hit 100 degrees earlier this year, accompanied by wildfires. Before that, Australia and the Amazon were in flames. And of course, right here in the Hawkeye State, in the heartland, Iowa's derecho. Bizarre straight-line winds that got as powerful as a major hurricane caused billions of dollars in damage, and it barely went noticed. Why? Well, Iowa gets ignored a lot in the national corporate news anyway, but also because of all of this other stuff that is going on. Freak natural disasters. Freak. Most, with what scientists say likely have a climate change connection, seem to be everywhere in the crazy year 2020. But here's the point that I wanted to get to. Experts say we'll probably look back and say those were the good old days when disasters weren't so wild. Quote, "It's going to get a lot worse," Georgia Tech climate scientist Kim Cobb said Wednesday. I say that with emphasis because it does challenge the imagination. And that's the scary thing to know as a climate scientist in 2020. Colorado University environmental scientist Chief Walid Abdelati, and he's NASA's former chief scientist, said the trajectory of worsening disasters and climate change from the burning of coal, oil, and gas is clear, and basic physics. Here's what he says. I strongly believe we're going to look back in 10 years, certainly 20, and definitely 50, and say, wow, 2020 was a crazy year, but I miss it. Now, that's because what's happening now is just the type of crazy climate scientists anticipated 10 or 20 years ago. And I remember that, folks. I was paying attention 10 or 20 years ago. That's not ancient history. That's what these guys were forecasting. It seems like this is what we were always talking about a decade ago, said North Carolina State climatologist Kathy Dello. Even so, Cobb says the sheer magnitude of what's happening now has been hard to fathom, just as the future of climate disasters is hard to fathom now. A year like 2020 could have been the subject of a marvelous science fiction film in 2000, Cobb said. Now we have to watch and digest real-time disaster after disaster after disaster on top of a pandemic. The outlook could not be any more grim. It's just a horrifying prospect. the 2030s are going to be noticeably worse than the 2020s, she said. All right, so that's your day brightener, folks. You want to know what's keeping me up at night? That keeps me up at night. And again, let's welcome on to podcast by George Channing Dutton. Channing, do you agree? Is the circumstance that grim? Is that the situation we're faced with today?
Well, George, for your viewers of the podcast, I should mention that I'm an attorney by day. But if you look behind me, this is my office.
Yeah.
And although I love my clients and I love the law, what I work on all the rest of the time is trying to protect this little boy over either shoulder of mine, who's my grandson, because he's going to follow us into the climate future. And I am embarrassed and ashamed to think about what he will think of me when he's 65, which I am right now. And when he's 65, he will be dealing with, I love that quote, he will be dealing with events that he would say, Channing, you weenie, 2020 was nothing. You should see what I'm dealing with now as the, entering maybe the last quarter or last third of my life, because by then his parents will be the older generation, and he'll probably, maybe, he'll have children following him, and he will be saddled with this horrible task of explaining what we did and what my parents did or didn't do. With your background, I know you know a lot about Ronald Reagan, but, even during the Reagan era, we were being warned. Ronald Reagan spoke about climate change.
Yes.
Jimmy Carter spoke about climate change. Richard Nixon spoke about climate change. Lyndon Johnson in 1965 was warned by the CIA that by the year 2030, and your audience will be interested in this, in 65, the CIA told LBJ that by 2030, the effects of the changing atmosphere would be noticeable by the average American. We are there now. And of course, what I ask every politician, when we have the caucuses running through here, I said to all these candidates, especially the senators, if the CIA was telling the president this in 1965, what are they telling you today?
Yes.
In 2020? Now, Senator Jeff Merkley from Oregon we did an event for him, and he told a room of 40 people that the Forest Service has told him that the Oregon forest will burn by 2080. It'll be gone.
Wow.
And you could hear a pin drop in that room, and this is probably 2019, maybe late 2018, when Senator Merkley, told that story. So he said, I don't know what they're telling the president, but he knows where the math is going. He knows what the problem is. So I am, in the polling, they say, well, are you concerned? Are you paying attention? Are you worried? Are you alarmed? Are you super alarmed? I'm super alarmed.
Well, agreed. I am too. And I agree. What I tell people is it ought to be the beginning and end of virtually every conversation that we're having, particularly the news media. And they're not covering it nearly enough. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about the Citizens Climate Lobby that you're affiliated with, because I try to follow some of the climate groups. I remember that they were big proponents of and heavily involved in promoting a carbon tax. Some people call it cap and trade or whatever. And I kind of like that approach because I'm just an average guy, but I think about cigarette smoking as an example. Nobody's smoking cigarettes these days. I don't know if you've noticed the difference between when Channing and I were kids. I mean, everybody was smoking cigarettes, but they're not. Why? They tax the hell out of it. It's so expensive. Nobody can afford to do it any longer. So again, this stuff is kind of like precedent and a history lesson. We know that works from not that long ago. So I kind of like that approach, but it's kind of like that baton has been dropped, Channing. I don't hear much about the carbon tax any longer. Where does that stand right now?
Well, Citizens Climate Lobby is a really great group, especially for your listeners or viewers who may be saying, well, what can I do? I want to get in the game. I want to take a first step. So, I shorthand it to CCL, but Citizens Climate Lobby is a great way to get started because, first off, it is a polite and civic organization. So every politician who you talk to, if you say, I'm with Citizens Climate Lobby, they have a good impression of this group. But there are 1,400 chapters around the world now, and there are people just like you and me. We attend a regular monthly meeting, and what we do is we advocate for putting a price on carbon. And because you and I are of the same generation, I often say to people, think of Jed Clampett in the opening of the Beverly Hillbillies. He shoots into the ground, and up comes the bubbling crude.
That's right.
Now, what Citizens Climate Lobby wants to do is they want to put a tax on the carbon content of that crude as it comes out of the ground. And they want that tax to land right there at that point. Now, by putting the tax on there, the original supplier, the Clampetts in this case, they raise their price to accommodate that tax, and the tax then is baked in no matter where the oil goes or the CO2 goes. And we know what a bucket of oil, what its CO2 potential is. So it's easy to create the tax. It's easy to structure the tax. And so we would do this with oil, with gas, we would do this with methane. And what this does is it builds in this tax, and it's exactly what it is. Some Democrats are afraid to call it a tax, but it's a tax. It's what we did to cigarettes, it's what we do to alcohol. We're doing it to marijuana. And so it's a tax, and we collect that tax. Now, where everybody rolls their eyes is they go, oh, it's a tax. Oh my goodness, we're just going to have big government. But the proposal of Citizens Climate Lobby is, no. We're going to take that tax. Now, government has to collect it. Somebody's got to be the piggy bank. But then once that piggy bank is filled, we start allocating the proceeds to the people. They don't go to the corporations. They don't go to the big business. They don't go to the government. They don't buy bombers and aircraft carriers and build buildings and anything. It goes to the people. And it would go to the people basically in a monthly dividend. You would get a check. And that check then becomes a huge influx of cash into the economy. The first year of the tax, it's projected to generate $65 to $70 billion into the economy. Now, the role of government then is, if $65 billion is going into the economy, you could create programs that encourage people to spend it wisely. So maybe you want to drive an electric vehicle. And we saw yesterday, the governor of California said, you're not going to be able to drive a gas car in 35 or in 15 years. By 2035, you're going to be driving an electric vehicle. And that's the biggest automotive regional market in the world. So what they do matters. And so maybe we incentivize purchase or ownership of electric vehicles, or electric transport, or easier transport, or battery storage, or charging, capabilities. I drive, my wife drives an electric car and I drive an electric car. And right now it's kind of an adventure. Where are we going to charge it, as we go? But it was an adventure back in the gasoline era too.
Yes.
I remember my father telling me they would, hitch up the horses and go to the general store to buy a container of gasoline, just as this era was beginning. And so it's the same with the battery and charging era. So the CCL program is neat because it keeps big government out, but it encourages big government to help people spend their money wisely. But they don't have to spend it. They can go to the casino with it if they want. But if we create programs that allows you to insulate, upgrade the windows in your home, become more energy efficient, help mass transportation, we get a double whammy for our buck, and the CCL plan escalates that tax as the years go by. So the tax gets heavier and heavier, but the idea, just like with cigarettes, is to make it crystal clear that there is a cost to what we are doing. And one last thing I should mention about the tax is the country, the United States, would adopt a law that says we welcome imports into the United States, but if you do not impose a carbon tax in your country, then we will impose an additional tax on your products as it comes into our country. But if you will impose a tax, China, Vietnam, India, Indonesia, South America, if you will impose your own tax, your products come in at their actual cost. And it's designed to export the carbon tax solution across the planet. And what a slick idea. And I love working with CCL. Sometimes they're not demanding enough. They're very, very polite. And that's the rule you got to sign up with. But it's a program that is so beneficial. I am certain we are going to do it. It will happen.
Well, and is it enough? And that politeness that you mentioned jumped out at me when you mentioned it the first time, and I want to get at that a little bit because yeah, the point of it is, the Paris Climate Agreement, which was thought to be very good, the Green New Deal. There are some climate scientists that say we've got to do better than that. And a lot of what we're seeing is kind of watered down right now. And I wanted to talk, and you guys are able, because of your politeness, to work within the political system. And this is my take on it. We talked a little bit off camera before we came on the air. I'm on the left side of things. Everybody that watches my podcast knows that. When it comes to Donald Trump and Joe Biden, I put it to people this way. Donald Trump is a narcissist. He's a self-indulgent man-child at best, and he's a nut at worst. And again, recent history, like we talked about, the precedent, he has proven that he is not going to do anything to address climate change, this horror that I started the show with. We're all going to die of this. Donald Trump cannot be reelected. On the other side of the coin, Joe Biden and the neoliberal class, as I refer to them, are largely responsible for an electorate that, even in the Electoral College, voted for a nut like Donald Trump. Joe Biden has a lot of baggage, boy. He is not my favorite coming into this. But the way that I put it to people is this way. Joe Biden is a politician. Richard Nixon was a politician. LBJ was a politician. If we go into the streets when we get a vaccine, or maybe even before because of this climate crisis, and we protest like our lives depend on it, which it did if you were 20 years old back in that era, I recall, we can move politicians. We can make them do things. Joe Biden wants to come in, I think, and administer like he did during the Obama administration. Joe, I got news for you, and I'm going to vote for you, though I'm not going to tell you that now. But if you get in, it ain't going to be like that. You're going to have some misery. You're at events, at news conferences. When you appear, people are going to be there to protest for immediate action. You can't do that if Donald Trump is reelected. Why? He'll black bag you. He'll throw you in the back of an SUV like he did the protesters in Portland, and you'll disappear. You couldn't move him if you wanted to, and you'll never even get the opportunity if Trump is elected. So that's reason by itself to vote for Joe Biden. But man, when it comes to the climate, he's got some crisis. Now I want to run a little clip here. This is Pramila Malik on Podcast by George just a few months ago. This was back before the Iowa caucuses, I think, so it was more than a few months ago. But she was talking about the entire slate of Democratic candidates, and she was grading them. And there might have been 12 candidates in the running back then. This is what she had to say about Joe Biden.
Yeah, he was part of Obama's all of the above energy policy, which really translated into total commitment to fracking. And so in 2015, the entire country began consuming more power from fracked gas than any other fuel source. And that was a monumental shift in our energy policy in the wrong direction. We should have been moving to hydro, wind, solar, and nuclear still has to be on the table because it's the only baseload carbon-free source of energy. But we committed 100% to frack gas at that point. So he was part of that. Biden, terrible record.
Let's grade these folks. I mean, it's not going to be anything precise, but A to F. We'll just take a quick spin through here. Give Biden give him a grade.
F.
An F.
Yeah.
So that's one of our climate guests, one of our frequent guests on Podcast by George, Pramila Malik. So, Channing, I know you're working within the system. CCL is polite, as you mentioned, and I know that you support Democrats, but what's your take on whether or not they can get done what we need to have done, particularly quickly enough?
Well, this is right on, and this is the key question. So during the caucuses, Joe Biden was always number 4 or number 5 in Channing's list. So I had some people who I really liked. I mentioned Senator Merkley. He would have been a great president, but he decided not to run. Followed him closely was Jay Inslee of Washington, and I was all in with Jay Inslee. What a great man, visionary. He understands what's going on, and his climate plan is really the cornerstone of where the Biden climate plan is right now. Then Jay Inslee he reads the tea leaves, and Tom Steyer comes into the picture. And oh my goodness, this guy is amazing. We had an event for him at our home. He was a rock star, converted everybody, but he didn't catch fire. During all that, I've been working, and you'll have to assure your viewers that you and I didn't pre-stage this, but I want to show you something that I've got this picture of my grandson, and that's my
yeah, the beauty.
I will act on climate for him.
Yeah, I love that.
I want to show you the back of it. So this says, I'm trying to get the light off it. This says POTUS Pledge, Day 1 Climate Action for Them. And if I can get my viewership understood, or my screen understood, right there is Joe Biden's signature. So I was at the steak fry in 2019 talking to all the candidates, asking them to be more involved, and only one candidate read the sign, walked up to it, asked for the pen. Now, he asked me to show him the backside, so it wasn't some stunt, but that was Joe Biden. And on my Twitter account, I put that picture up a lot, because if you haven't seen, and I would urge your viewers to go see it, go to Joe Biden's website. He has a video of his climate action plan, 4 minutes and 15 seconds. It's as good as Tom Steyer or Jay Inslee would do. And we just did an event 2 nights ago for the Biden campaign, because I'm all in. We've got to have Biden for the exact reasons you were talking about. He may not be my first choice, but he's my choice now, because Donald Trump is a catastrophe waiting to land on our children. And, well, he's landing on our children and grandchildren. And we did this. We are responsible because we were tepid and cool back in 2016, and we cannot make that mistake again. But the Biden video, when you watch it, you'll think, this is somebody I can deal with. And John Kerry, who's close to Joe Biden, we put that question to him during the Biden event, and he said, there is no doubt, day 1, there will be action. Now, there's going to be followed with other actions. But Secretary Kerry knows, and I think Joe Biden knows, none of this, oh, we're just going to rejoin Paris. No. Paris was a bad idea when it was Paris, and I think that was 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. When John Kerry put his granddaughter on his lap and he signed the Paris Accords. If we do that, we might as well just put our children in the toaster. Or as Tom Harkin said, I'm done driving nails in the coffin of my grandchildren. Because that's what we're doing.
You gotta love Tom Harkin. Well, that's well said. 86. Yeah.
I just want to add, unfortunately, he said it as he was leaving office, while he was in office. So we got to hold it. I mean, you are so right that if we have to take this to the street, I'm a very polite guy, but I'm a passionate guy. And when I wear the Citizens Climate Lobby hat, it's fun to be polite and nice, and I play by their rules. But I wear other hats too. And some of those hats are, no, action, right now. No horsing around. We got to go. The Visigoths are at the gate. Time to save it is right now.
I couldn't say it better. We share that hat. That's absolutely right. And I'm out of time here. We got to run. I try to hold these things to 25 minutes or so, and it seems like they always go by too quickly. It's because of guests like Channing Dutton. This is a fascinating conversation. One thing I wanted to end with here, and maybe you can just use this as a closer, maybe for your closing remarks as an attorney there, Channing, but Joe Biden's on record here just in the last month or so saying he will not ban fracking. What the hell? I mean, will he partially ban fracking? Will he reduce fracking? You mentioned California, where they're going to put those electric cars on the streets. The governor of California has approved 48 fracking licenses already this year. They're setting a record for fracking in California as we speak. Where does CCL come down on fracking? And what's Joe Biden and the next administration going to do about that?
Well, first off, let me thank you for the time here today. And let me tell you that where CCL is on this is we have the solution. and that is when that carbon content comes out of the ground, slap the tax on it. We are gonna price that to where we are paying the real cost of bringing that out of the ground. And while we help the electric car business and the mass transit, and we help the atmosphere and wind and solar and energy transportation and battery, while we help all those businesses, the carbon tax is going to stunt the gas industry. The pipeline era is over. It's done. They just don't know it. I'm sure your viewers probably aren't investing in fossil fuel, but they shouldn't be. It'd be like buying beachfront property in Miami. So I'm not sure if I answered your question, but CCL's plan is tailor-made to get rid of that, at least of the incredible harm that fracking is doing on multiple levels. And it'll happen quickly.
I hope you're right. And I tell you what, Channing, we'll circle back here. I like this conversation. I appreciate you coming on the podcast. Like I said, we're limited by time. I think you and I could easily go for a couple, 3 hours. We're of the same age. We're out of the same era. We have the same historical set. I think we're sharing notes. Folks, that's Channing Dutton. He's with the Citizens Climate Lobby. I hope you appreciated the opportunity to, again, revisit this this dinosaur at the door that's going to eat us all, this bear in waiting, and it's the climate catastrophe, folks. It's honest. It's going to get worse, like those climate scientists are saying. And I guess in closing, what I would say is they've been proven right. I'm a big believer in precedent. If you were undecided back like we were talking about in the 80s and the 90s or whatever, these guys were right once spent and twice shy, folks. I mean, believe them now. They're telling you that we're going to look back on this with fondness. That's how bad it's going to get. And if we don't do something huge, really big, let's go big. I think that was another presidential candidate that had that as a slogan. But anyway, that's going to wrap it up. That's going to do it for this particular episode. Again, go to podcastbygeorge.com. Select the little badge, the icon that you'd like to subscribe to as to where you want to follow Podcast by George, Twitter, YouTube, Spotify, the iHeartRadio app. I've had somebody remind me that they listen there. So YouTube and of course, Facebook is one of our primary vehicles. Channing, thanks again, but before I forget, for coming on Podcast by George.
Thank you so much.
And we'll be back with you again soon, folks. Thanks for watching. That's going to do it. And there ain't no more this time. That's another Podcast by George.